This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Louisianians will be making some important decisions next week. On Tuesday, they join the nation in selecting a president, as well as facing some local ballot issues. And then the next day, the Louisiana legislature convenes for a crucial special session that could deliver a statewide taxing overhaul. We'll take a look at these stories, as well as the demolition of 60 houses in an eastern New Orleans neighborhood that were built on a hazardous waste landfill. The question now is, what will happen at that location? And as fans mourn his loss, we will remember the career of longtime news anchor Eric Paulsen. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Sally Ann Roberts, retired anchor and morning show co-host, WWL Louisiana, Channel 4, and Robert Collins, political analyst for WVUE Fox 8 and columnist for Verité News. So first off, we're going to go on over to Errol, because we are facing a big election next week. But in Louisiana, the ballot's not that long.
No, and for presidential elections, because it's a presidential election, people envisioning long lines and long ballots, but it could be neither. First of all, a presidential election is never a long process because it's down to two people, really. I mean, there's the other candidates, but everybody knows who's running, so they're not going to be deliberating on who to vote for. But the other things on the ballot, there's no really significant election in Louisiana. Now, some states, like in Texas, there's a major runoff for the U.S. Senate going on. In some states, you have contested congressional seats. None of the congressional seats in Louisiana is really seriously contested, except in the Baton Rouge area. Right. And this was the one that was designed to be a new black majority. And by all accounts, Cleo Fields is the heavy favorite in that. All the others are not really seriously contested. So there's not going to be going on in that. In New Orleans, there's a few school board races. And, people don't pay attention to the school board like they used to, since it's all charters and that.
In Orleans.
What?
In Orleans Parish, yeah.
Yeah, in Orleans. Everywhere there's constitutional amendments and charter amendments, but nothing really controversial. So it will not take long to vote once you get there. And so people should be aware of that. It's just different than other places. Some places have state elections on their ballots, like you're voting for governor at the same time you're voting for president, and then you really have something. So part of that, though, is I think it affects the turnout. It affects the interest among other people. If you have a congressional race on your ballot, like senators, there are two senators elected for 6-year terms, but they rotate every 3 years. It turns out this is the third year where we don't have any of our senators on the ballot. That turns out voters, and we're not going to have that this time. So if you're planning to go vote, you don't have to budget too much time. It's going to be fairly simple.
Well, it is a short ballot. I mean, certainly on the ballot, too, statewide is a constitutional amendment regarding dedicating funds from that are going to perhaps be generated from alternative fuel sources like solar and wind to the Coastal Restoration Trust Fund. So that, be considering that one. And then in Orleans Parish, there are a couple of charter amendments.
And there's no serious opposition to that one. And so the chances it's going to pass. The one about dedicated funding for housing in Orleans, the Picayune has opposed it, but I think it's because BGR, Bureau of Governmental Research, has done. Usually BGR is the leader in terms of how newspapers and other people, because they're smart. I mean, they have sound reasoning. Right. So I think that could go either way. And so if there's any question, it might be that particular home rule charter amendment, but nothing else really controversial.
Right, and that's just in Orleans also for the Orleans.
There's also some neighborhoods have crime protection zones, and there are some that are pretty much like renewals for crime protection zones, and I would suspect everybody's in favor of that.
Still, if it's short ballot or not, it's really important to go out there and vote.
Absolutely.
Right? Absolutely. Go cast your vote. It's a right that we need to treasure and protect, and we'll hear more about that a little later. And speaking about voting, I mean, right now we're into really majorly the two-party system, and that's kind of what you wanted to talk about, Robert, is how we're looking in Louisiana for our two-party system.
Well, so, Louisiana is interesting. So in a state of about, with a population of about 4.6 million people, we have about 3 million registered voters. Of those 3 million registered voters, about 1.1 are registered Democrat, about 1 million are registered Republican, and about 850,000 are registered independent. So we're kind of trending toward a trend where within a few years we're probably going to have about a third Democrat, a third Republican, and a third independent. The numbers of registered Democrats have been going down for the last several decades. Mm-hmm. The numbers of registered Republicans have gone up. So it's only a matter of time within the next few years that Republicans are gonna pass up registered Democrats.
And even though there's more Republicans than Democrats, look at the recent Senate. I mean, more Democrats than Republicans. Mm-hmm. Look at the recent statewide elections where it was a sweep for the Republicans. So the Democrats basically have no serious power in the state of Louisiana right now, even though they still have the majority of the voter registration, and that's because most of the Democrats that we have are what we call ancestral Democrats, sort of old Southern Democrats that are social conservatives that might be fiscal moderates, but that they're social conservatives. People forget for most of the history of the Democratic Party, you had the Northern Democrats that were more liberal on social issues, and you had the Southern Democrats that were fairly conservative on social issues. People forget the Civil Rights Act. Not a single Southern Democrat in the United States Senate voted for the Civil Rights Act. In fact, some people argue that historically it was the passage of the Civil Rights Act that was sort of the death knell of the Democratic Party in the South. People have said that Lyndon Johnson said when the Civil Rights Act and then the Voting Rights Act was passed that we've lost the South for a generation. We haven't been able to directly say that he said that. In all likelihood, it was probably a member of the U.S. Senate that told him that. Well, I think it was Richard Russell.
Yeah, well, that's what people said.
Yeah, conversation. He said, Lyndon, we're going to lose the. We're going to lose the Democratic Party. We're going to lose the South for a generation.
So we see. Let me jump into this because we see here in Louisiana we do see a decreasing number of registered Democrats, and you consider that's probably going to decrease more. But independents growing. So, if you're registered as an independent, does that keep you from voting at any times with closed primaries?
No. So the interesting thing about independents is at one time it did under past legislation, but even though Governor Landry wanted to change our open primary system and basically shut down all of the offices to so that basically independents would only be able to vote in the general election, the state legislature would not go along with that because they said no, that's really not the Louisiana way. So even though in congressional races only Democrats can vote in the Democratic primary and only Republicans can vote in the Republican primary, independents can actually still vote in either primary. So and remember, the governor wanted to close the primaries for every office across the board, but the state legislature said no, that's not the Louisiana way. We'll do it for the congressional races, for the U.S. Senate race, but we don't feel comfortable doing that for gubernatorial and the other statewide races.
So Louisiana is considered a really solid red state. How did that play out in early voting tabulations?
Well, of course, we actually broke all the records of within early voting. Basically, 1/3 of the state has actually already early voted. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a combination of two things. I think during the pandemic, a lot of people got used to early voting just because it was safer to social distance, et cetera. So I think people are just in the habit of doing it now. And then this year, I think it's such a highly emotional election that even though Louisiana is not a swing state, we're a red state, we're a Trump state, we know Trump's going to carry this state. Honestly, I think the Trump voters kind of just want to run up the score. So I think they were just motivated to turn out no matter what. So I think just that it's just highly emotional. And I would say this, I believe regardless of, whether you're a swing state or not a swing state, I think everybody has an obligation to vote. I think it's just it is not simply a right. It is an obligation. So you can't say, we're not a swing state. We know how the state's going to go. I'm not going to vote. No, I don't buy that. You still have the same moral obligation as a citizen that participates in the political process. You still have the obligation to vote.
And too many people suffered. Many died for our right to vote. And in my lifetime, it was very difficult to vote. And I think that what we're seeing now is the people are coming alive and they're realizing that their vote matters and who is in office matters. And so when I went out to vote early, I found that it was very easy, moved quickly. But I think that now is a good time to let people know where you stand on the issues because their vote does matter.
We value the right to vote, and elections matter.
Yes.
Elections do indeed matter. All right, guys. All right, now we're going to move on to someone who really mattered and continues to matter to our community. Very close to you, Sally Ann. You work with him for a very, very long time, developed just a loving relationship with him. And we're talking about, of course, Eric Paulsen, who passed away. We lost him way too soon. Passed away last week. You know the man.
Oh, my.
And we just wanted to have you here and share with us your thoughts about Eric.
Eric was a wonderful man. People knew him on television. We started the same week back in 1977. And Eric has been on the air for nearly 50 years in New Orleans. People grew to love him, but there was more to Eric than his participation in the news. He was a part of this city. He was somebody who just loved New Orleans. He thought he was just going to be passing through, moving on to the next. But like so many who come to New Orleans thinking that they're just going to pass through, they stay because there's something about this community. When you saw the hundreds and hundreds of people who came out for the second line, that tells you the wonderful man that he is. He grew up on the air, looking so young there.
Right. That was in the 70s. He came to New Orleans, in 1977 to WWL. News reporter, and then was made, like you said, a morning anchor, one of the first morning shows there at WWL. Then went on with Lee Sinclair and did PM Magazine, which was so popular.
It was a national magazine, and he, there he is. Oh my goodness, this brings back so many memories. Seeing Eric.
I could just hear that theme song right now in my brain. Anyway, not hear it actually, but I can hear
and
that theme
Andre
song.
Trevine.
Andre,
Westbrook.
Yeah, Andre. And he hosted the WWL morning show for years. And
Many years.
And then you followed Andre. So what was that like every morning to be with a, yeah, there you are, to be with him every morning?
Every morning it was an adventure. Eric always came in ready to report the news, but to more than that, to let people know that we see you. That's what's special about the Eyewitness Morning News. It allows New Orleans to be seen, and he enjoyed showcasing all of the talent in New Orleans. And the musicians absolutely loved Eric and actually called on him quite often to be a part of their different concerts. But Eric was a man who loved deeply. He loved his wife, Bethany, those two, the dynamic duo. He loved his family, he loved his friends, but he loved the culture of this city, and that's what kept him here, and that's what keeps so many people in New Orleans. You think you're just coming in here and you're going to just keep on going up the ladder, but you realize that there's something special about New Orleans. There is that the people love deeply, and if they accept you, then you know that you're home. And I think that's, Eric loved New Orleans because he loved the culture, he loved the music, he loved everything about the city, and the city loved him right back.
And he was really honest and truthful too. I mean, what you saw
yes.
was what you got. That was really Eric.
Oh yes, Eric was very, very, very truthful, and he asked tough questions. He paid attention. He would go where the interview led him. He wouldn't have a set of notes and say, I'm going to read this, and this is the question I'm going to do. He listened, and he was truly involved with the audience. And people felt that he really cared about them, and he did. I think that one thing that I'm going to remember, and his life has affected me so, because you think that Eric is always going to be here. You know, he just always seemed younger. You know, he would never say his age. People would say, well, how old are you? He said, how old do I look? And they would say something there. He said, yeah, you got me, yeah. And I think that he had so much to give, and I miss him so much because, you know, I still want to pick up the phone and call him for advice, or just to hear him, the jokes he would say. You know, he would tell jokes, but not like a comedian. Just in conversation, he would have this whole table laughing right now. Something that he would say. But Eric,
and he has been at this table too.
Oh,
you know,
yes.
both as a panelist, and he's acted as a host sometimes too. He filled in for me a couple of times.
He was also known for being very generous with his time. If people wanted to host an event or something,
always, his schedule was always packed. He said yes more than he said no, and that's what I think I want to always remember about Eric. He gave of himself much more than the average person. He always was available. Every time I asked him for anything, he was right there to help. And when my husband of 25 years, my first husband, passed away, Eric was the first person to come through the door and weeping and to just give me a hug and tell me it was going to be all right.
A dear, loving man who is loved by so many, of course, by his dear friends, but of course by his family. And our deepest condolences to Bethany, his wife, who he just adored, and of course his children.
His children and his family. And also, I just have to say that Eric was more than a newscaster. He was also a brilliant photographer. Have you seen his photos? If you go to his Facebook page, you'll see a lot of the photographs there. But when I was putting together a book, an inspirational book, and I asked Eric to provide the photographs for it, and they're just magnificent. He is a treasure. He will not be forgotten. And I think the best thing that we can do to remember Eric is to be more like him, to say yes more than we say no, to be available, to see people as Eric saw everybody that crossed his path. He didn't treat very distinguished politicians in a greater way than he treated the ordinary citizen coming in saying, I need to tell you something. And something else he would do, he would make people feel exceedingly comfortable in that, you know, people would come in and they'd never been on television before. And they're just nervous. And Eric would sit down with them during the commercial break. They'd laugh, and by the time we went on the air, they were just as natural because you realized they were talking to a friend.
Put him right at ease, yeah. Well, I know you miss Eric and will miss Eric, but he'll always be with you and with his family and always just be a big part of this community. And we thank him for everything that he gave to this community and that he stayed here with us, too.
Yes,
okay,
and
Sally.
blessings and blessings and blessings to Bethany and the family.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Sally Ann. Okay, E, let's talk quickly about also neighborhood in New Orleans East that houses actually finally have been torn down and people.
Yeah, this is a story that had a tragic beginning, but maybe having a happy ending at least. There's a place out east in New Orleans on Abundant Street. It was called Gordon Plaza, which was like a subdivision, and it was once the site of a landfill called the Agriculture Street Landfill. And it was discovered to be just like built on top of toxic waste. It was so bad that people referred to it as Dante's Inferno, because sometimes there'd be gases leaking out or spontaneous fires would start. So ultimately, it was closed. But the people who had built houses that they built, with on the appearance, seemed to be like nice suburban-style houses. They were built for low-income people to provide housing for them. And then there was all kinds of problems with people finding the impacts of the toxic waste. So over the years, people started moving out. The people who lived there asked the city for money to finance their moving out and to build a new house. Ultimately, they got it, that the city came together and it was something like $300 million. And this week, they started tearing down the houses. There's like 62 of them that the city has bought. And so demolition crews came in and started tearing down those houses. And it was quite a sight to see them. And so what happens next is that they, once it's done, they want to build a solar farm to generate energy, and the energy will be used to help provide energy for the pumping system that we have. And so that's something, and it's a good moment for city government.
Yeah, and a long-time resolution to a very serious problem.
Dealing with the
there.
problem.
Yeah.
So
okay, all righty, thanks a lot, Robert. Let's go over to you and do our wrap-up story, because we're going to be into a special session of the Louisiana legislature next week. They're going to consider our tax structure.
Yeah, so the special session will start on November the 6th, right after Election Day. It's kind of weird that they're starting it right after Election Day, but and it must end on November 25th or before November 25th. So it's going to be a limited session. The only thing on the call document is taxes, even though our legislature always finds a way to sneak some other things in there. So the number one issue that has to be handled is right now, if the 0.45% sales tax that's on the books right now is not renewed, we are looking at between a 400 to 700 million budget shortfall. So that's the first thing that's going to have to be done. That sales tax is going to have to be renewed, and the governor supports that. So we don't expect any problems there. Mm-hmm. But other than that, the governor wants to actually reform the entire tax structure, and we don't exactly know what that means, because the governor did not include those details in the call. The governor has said he wants to look at some version of a flat tax and primarily funding state government through sales taxes, which some other states have done. He wants to reduce the business tax rate. So basically, the governor's argument is that the current tax structure is too complex and is not business friendly, and that's why he cannot attract more business and industry to the state of Louisiana. That's going to be the governor's argument.
Now, the governor's a powerful governor, and of course, as a legislature, he has a supermajority there. But still, we're hearing from legislators saying, we want to see the details here. The devil's in the details, and we just really don't know where this is going to go.
And the governor hasn't revealed it yet, so we really don't know what's going to happen during this session.
Well, one thing that can be dicey is I know that there's talk about possibly removing the exemptions on movie credits. And we know that argument about the jobs it creates and all. Well, that's one thing to be looking at.
Yeah. Well, the governor has said that his position is that too many special interest groups receive tax exemptions right now. And so, his people are talking about maybe we should just eliminate them across the board. Now, obviously, that movie tax credit, that's a very popular one. So politically, that's going to be difficult to remove that one, because it's not just about the jobs in the industry. It's about the image of the state. People, the tourism folks want to show the state in the movies because they argue it brings tourists here. So that's going to be dicey trying to get rid of that tax exemption.
There's going to be a lot of argument coming up in the special session, no doubt, because also there's concern about taxes placed on things and services that we don't pay taxes on right now.
Yeah, exactly. So government still has to be funded, and so if you talk about reducing the business tax rate, if you talk about eliminating the corporate franchise tax, other services are going to have to be taxed, and so so who's going to carry that burden? I'm a former U.S. Senate staffer, and Senator Russell Long used to have an old saying. He used to say, "Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the fellow behind the tree."
Right.
And that's sort of the attitude that most American taxpayers have. I mean, we all admit that somebody's got to pay the taxes. Is just we just don't want. We just don't want it to be a burden on our particular business or our particular industry or our particular activity. So it's going to be a tough session. I mean, yes, there are Republican supermajorities in both houses, but I promise you, the governor's going to get a lot of pushback from his Republican friends in the legislature.
And the big issue in Louisiana has always been the property tax. And Louisiana, in fact, the current Constitution, I remember with Lawrence Shahorty, who was the assessor, who was the chairman of it, and the key issue that the passage of the whole Constitution was built on, was keeping the property tax down low.
Yeah, and the homestead exemption is sort of one of those things that we just accept as sort of a right, and those nobody wants the homestead exemption to be lowered, and so
is that going to be considered in this session too? The homestead exemption?
No, well, it in theory it could be. I don't think it will, because the homestead exemption is one of those things that is popular amongst both Democrats and Republicans because it's popular with homeowners and their constituents. It's just it's one of those third rail issues that nobody wants to touch because you'll be electrocuted if you touch
well, it's going to be interesting. It starts, as you point out, day after election.
Day after the election,
and how long?
And it must end on or before November 25th.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Going to be a lot of arguments up there in Baton Rouge for sure. Okay, we'll be covering it. E, other stories.
The Super Bowl host committee has announced a whole series of events in connection with the Super Bowl, which will be February 9th. One thing they're going to have is that Saturday, February 8th, they're having the first annual and I guess first ever Super Bowl host committee Mardi Gras parade thing. And the king is going to be Gary Graves, who will not be reelected to Congress this time because he got squeezed out in that black majority thing. So in the year when he didn't get to be a congressman, he gets to be a king.
He gets to be a king. Okay. Sally Ann.
And Monica Pierre and I co-host Your Power is On Gospel Music Show on WBOK, and this Sunday at 7 a.m. It's WBOK 1230 a.m. as well as WBOK1230.com. We're going to have a show about the importance of voting, and you're going to hear Fannie Lou Hamer speaking contemporaneously of what it was like for her going to the polls. And also on the 10th of November at 10 a.m., we're going to have a tribute to Eric Paulsen.
Okay, we'll be listening for that. Thanks, Sally Ann. Robert.
Okay, so regardless of who wins the presidential race on Tuesday, look for Louisiana people to be in the future cabinet. If Trump wins, there's talk that Bobby Jindal will be considered for a cabinet position, perhaps Secretary of Health and Human Services. And if Harris wins, there's talk that, of course, Mitch Landrieu, who's currently working as one of her surrogates going around campaigning for her, will also be considered for a cabinet position.
Okay, a big day next Tuesday. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.